Hi and welcome to my channel. I'm Simon and today I'm back with a rather belated March wrap up. I said I was going to get this out at the beginning of April and it didn't happen, and I won't lie to you, I actually thought I'd put it live on my channel already. I've never even filmed it, so I don't know what that's all about. But that is what you've got today. It might be a bit of a nasty edit, as it were, just in terms of being top and tailed rather than me zooming in and stuff. But that's because I want to get this one out, as it were. So I am going to do this reading wrap up a little bit differently than usual because I've decided to do the books in order of my least favourites to my favourites of March, and that's partly because it will make a video that I make for Patreon a little bit easier, because every month on Patreon I am updating my patrons with what my top 10 books of the year are so far, and it's been an interesting experiment to film that one, and I'm hoping this will make it earlier. Now, make it earlier? No, make it easier. I mean, it's certainly not going to make it earlier because this couldn't frankly be later. I mean, it could, but it's not. We are over midway through April. Shame on me. I was going to say promise, I endeavour to do April's at the beginning of May. That said, I should just mention that things are possibly going to be a little bit more sporadic with the channel over the coming weeks and months, because there's a big new project that I'm going to be starting. Sort of behind the scenes stuff starts next week, and then hopefully there'll be an announcement actually soon. But then, yeah, it all gets a bit bonkers at the end of May, and the lead up is going to be quite a lot. So yeah, just to say that if I have a bit of time where I'm not here, it's not because I'm gone, it's just because I've got other stuff going on. And I guess that's why this is later, because I'm trying to film when I'm in the mood for filming rather than forcing myself to film. And this last weekend I think that's why I thought I'd uploaded it maybe. Oh goodness, this turned into a therapy session. But basically, I just wasn't in the mood to film this weekend, so I had a weekend doing very little, and that was lovely. And I'm trying to keep the balance good this year, and the last couple of weeks been a bit bonkers, as you will have seen in the last vlog that I did, and you'll see in my next vlog, which is me reading all the Women's Prize books that I hadn't read before the shortlist announcement, as me and Mum are going to be doing our predictions of our long list to short list personal predictions from the 16. Speaking of which, I'm not going to include these two books that I read in March in this wrap up because they are on the Women's Prize long list, and I don't want to give anything away in case Mum watches this. She doesn't watch every video, but she watches a few. Yeah, I'm gonna leave it spoiler free until we catch up this coming weekend when we're off on a bookish road trip for a video that will go live, or two videos actually, one on each of our channels, that will go live in June for Independent Bookshop Week. Very exciting. Anyway, there we go. You might see some of that though in my next reading vlog. So, in order of enjoyment from least to most, we're going to start, sadly, with Women Talking by Miriam Toews. And I've seen a few people recently, including Renee of So I Read This Book and Ben Reads Good, who both really like this. And I really like them and I like their opinions, but they're wrong. I think lots of people really like this book. However, sadly for me, this book left me really cold, which, considering the subject matter, makes me feel like an absolute bar steward. It's based on the true story of a group of Mennonite women who thought that they were being sexually abused by aliens or demons or spirits of some kind, until one of the women caught one of the perpetrators of what was going on, and it turned out to be one of the men from their Mennonite community. And it turned out that lots of these men, these brothers, husbands, sons, were all doing this, and it's just horrific. However, this book is based around an imagined meeting of the women when they decide if they are going to stay and fight, whether they'll stay and do nothing, or whether they will leave. And the conversation becomes quite confusing and quite cyclical in some ways, and not repetitive exactly, but almost, which I feel awful saying. But because there were so many voices, I never really felt I got to know the women individually. And whilst it is about what's happened to a group of women, I think to have had insight into them a little bit more would have probably kind of had much more of an impact on me, and I would have been much more emotionally invested in what they had gone through. And I just wasn't so much. I just found myself thinking, hang on a minute, which character's saying this bit? And hang on, who's that? Oh, hang on, who's left? Who's still there? What's going on? And I didn't have any issue, which I know some people who didn't like it have had, where the book is sort of documented by a man from the men-like community. That didn't bother me at all, but because there's reasons for that. But yeah, I sadly did not like this book very much. It just left me feeling a bit meh after I'd finished it. And I enjoyed the film, and I read this before I saw the film. Not enjoyed. I admired the film very much. However, it was a similar thing. I didn't feel like I got to know the women very well. So yeah, that's clearly an issue that I've had with that book. So there we go. Then we have Strange Sally Diamond, and I'm so disappointed that I didn't enjoy this more. I asked the publishers to send me this, and they never did, which I guess, I mean, if a publisher sent me a book and I didn't like it, I would say I didn't like it, but I'd be a bit more delicate than if I bought a book myself, which I have. But I've wanted to read Liz Nugent for a while, and I have little cruelties or something on the shelves somewhere down there, which I will read to give her another chance. But this, to me, had so much promise and kind of didn't deliver anything for me. So this is about a young woman called Sally Diamond who has been living with her father. It's just been them. He's getting frailer and frailer, and he always said, when I die, just put me out with the bins. And so when he dies, she does, because she takes everything very literally. As we soon learn, she has what some people initially think is autism, and we soon learn is actually to do with post-traumatic disorder, or she's been through something that her brain is just refusing to share. And things start to arrive in the post after she's in the papers for what happens to her father, and her history starts to come to the fore, and her sort of secret past that she'd locked away from herself, but other people around her did know. And that's what I'm going to say about the plot, because I don't want to give anything away to anyone who's not read it. I feel like, though, I think this is part of my issue, I feel like I've read this story before. It reminded me a little bit of Eleanor Oliphant is Absolutely Fine. Is that what it was called? I should know. That was my Costa winner when I was doing the debuts years ago. But it reminded me of that. The writing also reminded me slightly of Joanna Cannon, who will be appearing later, but I actually didn't think this was as good as Joanna Cannon's. It felt, I have to say, a little bit uncomfortable for me, because it's when there are books about characters who have either a mental disorder or something going on with them that makes them different from everybody else, it's got to be done really deftly, and I felt this was a bit heavy-handed, and sometimes I found it a little bit when I was reading it, because it just seemed a bit, not obvious, what's the term I want to use? I don't know, I felt like it was a bit voyeuristic, and a lot of reading is because you're, reading into characters' private lives and stuff, but this just felt like a bit icky to me. There was something icky about it that I wasn't sure about, so I was really, really sad about it. I did devour it on the plane out to Mexico, but I just kept feeling generally while I was reading it, if that's a technical term. Then we have Gods of Jade and Shadow by Silvia and Moreno Garcia, which was the book club pick for March. Why am I questioning that? Oh, it's because we've done April's recently, which was pod, actually, and I'll talk about that at another point. Anyway, Gods of Jade and Shadow by Silvia and Moreno Garcia. This was one of 4 books that my patrons got to pick from, set in Mexico, and this one got the most votes, and so we read it, and it was a really interesting experience for me, because I haven't read fantasy for quite a long time, and this is very much about the myths and legends and folklore, the Mayan myths and folklore and legends from Mexico. And I was just like so excited because I was going to Mexico and I wanted to read this in advance, and overall I enjoyed it. I thought the setting was really interesting. how can I put it? And when is it set exactly? I think it's the 1940s. It's the Jazz Age. Is that the 1940s? And we meet Cassiopeia, who is living in her, is it her grandfather's or her great uncle's house? And her and her mother live there, but they're basically treated like staff. And there's initially I was like, oh, this is Cinderella story, and then Silvia Garcia says, this is not a Cinderella story. I was like, oh, you read my mind. And then one day, Cassiopeia is going through her grandfather or great uncle's things and finds a trunk filled with bones. She pricks her finger on it. I know, there's a fairy tale nod there. And the bones come to life, and it turns out it is one of the gods from the underworld whose brother had, along with her grandfather or great uncle, like captured him and put him into this box as bones, and now he's back and he wants to take over, and she's now tied to him, so they have to go on an adventure together to sort it all out. And I loved that element of it, and I loved all, like I said, the missing edges, the stuff around the cenotes and the winged serpents that would swim in them, and the way that they would throw people in, and the fact that they're the gateway to the underworld and all that kind of stuff. Loved all of that. I also really loved what it was saying about women at that time in Mexico and how things were changing and how people weren't quite ready for that. I thought that was brilliantly weaved through as kind of Cassiopeia sort of comes into her own, albeit through the magic of this Lord of the Underworld. And the only thing I will say is I found the ending really disappointing, because something dreadful happens and then it kind of had a big redemptive moment. I was like, you could have just left it at the dreadful thing. The shock of that was brilliant. So I enjoyed it very much, and it was a great sort of dipping my toe, not into a cenote filled with winged serpents, but into fantasy, which I haven't read for a while, and I do want to read more of her books. So we have that. Then, and I should say, like, the first two were like 2 out of, I might be pushing it actually, but like 1 out of 5. This one was, I'd give this, actually, is that mean? I would give these both like 2 out of 5. I'd give this 3 out of 5. I would give the next 3, 4, 3.5 out of 5, which I think is really good, because that's like 7 out of 10, right? And the first of those is Isaac and the Egg by Bobby Palmer, which I read for an event that I did with him and the aforementioned, who will be mentioned again, Joanna Cannon. This is a tale very unlike any I've read before, and I was intrigued by this because on the back of the book it said, and this is in my last vlog actually, along with the next 4 books. No, the next 2, and then Joanna Cannon later, because I read them at the end of March, and they were workbooks because I was reading them for events, and so I vlogged all of that along with Pip's hen do, my birthday, and some other stuff. So anyway, what's this about? I was really, really intrigued by this because it says on the back, Isaac stands alone on a bridge and screams into the river below. Something screams back. And that, like everything which follows, is unforgettable. And just the idea of somebody being on a bridge in the middle of nowhere and screaming gives you a real sort of intrigue into them, and clearly they're going through something very difficult. But then the idea of something screaming back just really kind of got me. It was a bit X-Filesy, and I was all excited for it. And this delivered, because at first, when Isaac goes off to see what screams back, funnily enough, it's an egg-like thing. I was a bit like, oh, I don't know how this is going to go for me. But Bobby Palmer completely made me feel like this could be happening, and the way it then looks at what Isaac is going through and the grief that he's going through and how he takes this egg-like thing home, and how it, and what goes on from there, I won't spoil anything, I thought was really brilliantly done. And there's some real comical moments, but there's some absolute heartbreaking moments. And then what I thought was brilliant was, initially we're like, what is this egg? Where's it come from? Why? And we're with Isaac like that. And then Bobby flips it over just literally like a paragraph where he's like, the egg was thinking, Isaac, what are you all about? And why do you go off into a room? And where do you disappear to at times? And there's just all these mysteries going on. And I thought it was really, really deftly done. So yes, I'm really, really chuffed that I read it for the event, because I just thought it was brilliant. I can't wait for Bobby's next book, which I believe is going to be about a fox. and I am all about foxes. I absolutely love them, so very excited for that one. Blimey, I should speed through these a little bit more because I'm already 15 minutes in and I've only done 4 out of quite a considerable amount. Then for another event, I read Weyward by Emilia Hart. This is a witchy historical gothic tale which is set over 3 different time periods. We have one time period where we meet Altha, who is she's on trial for witchcraft around the time of the Pendle witches. Then we meet Violet in the 1940s, who her mother has disappeared. No one talks about her, and or has she died? But no one talks about her basically, and so she's got all these questions around it. And then she meets an ex-cousin, and something awful happens. And then we meet Katie in the almost present day, who is in an abusive relationship with a horrible man called Simon, and it's her fleeing to her great aunt's cottage, Weyward, and it's how these 3 women's lives are all interlinked and how there are certain similarities, and as it goes on it's very much about the magic of nature and the earth and nature, but also there's revenge. That's all I want to say. The only thing I would have liked is a bit more of the magic, because when it happened it was incredible. And also, that said, there is a real twist with one of the characters that I absolutely blinking loved. I thought it was so well done. If you've read it, I'd love to know if you can guess which character that is, because I just thought that was ace. I thought that was ace. So we have this, very, very gripping. I devoured it, as I did The Key in the Lock by Beth Underdown, which is the second of Beth's novels and the second of hers that I've read. And her previous one, funny enough, was about the Witchfinder General's sister, or the Witchfinder's sister, and dealt with the witch trials in Essex, and so linked to Weyward in that way. This links to Weyward in another way in the fact that it is incredibly gothic. It's got a big spooky house at the heart of it, and it's all about secrets locked away. And I cannot really say much more than we meet a woman called Ivy who she's just found out that her son has been killed in the Great War, and this sends her back to a time in the 1880s when her father was a doctor and she had to go to the big old house where a young boy had died after there'd been a fire, and he died of smoke inhalation. And the 2 dual narratives go on from there, and different things are revealed that make you gasp because of characters in the past, but also because of when you're in the past, you gasp because something you know is going to happen later and affects what's going on in the current, well, not current like right now, but in the future time period. I've made it sound more complicated than it is. It is a complex, twisty book, and I think the way that Beth Underdown has done it is brilliant. And what I really loved about this, that could have gone horribly wrong actually, is the nods it has to Rebecca. Even like the first line, it felt like there was a nod. There's a moment where Ivy breaks something and hides it, which is what happens to the second Mrs. De Winter. There's a not particularly nice member of the house staff liking Rebecca, and it's just done in this really lovely way. Not like it's homage, but it's also, but at the same time it's not like copying or anything. It's just their nods, and I'm going to call them the ripples of Rebecca in this, that I really enjoyed, plus a big old spooky house. Then we have, and I think, do I give this 3.5 or 4? This is why I don't normally do them in order whether I like them or not, because I kind of feel like it's arbitrary. But also on Storygraph, I do love the fact that I can give things 0.5 stars. I won't lie. Anyway, we have Black Cake by Charmaine Wilkerson, which I feel like I could do a whole video on this book, because it's such kind of like an epic story that I almost don't really know where to begin, although I do. So we meet a brother and sister as they are going to hear the will reading from their mother who has died, and all that they've been left with is her famous black cake and a tape which they start to listen to. And from then they hear the stories of their mother or versions of their mother that they can't quite believe because she has kept so many secrets. And what we do is follow that. And that makes it sound sort of, not simplistic, what's the term I want to use? It makes it sound like the sort of thing you've heard before, which I've moaned about when I was talking about Strange Sally Diamond. But what this book does is then take us over decades and decades of what Black women from the Caribbean have been through and how they have had to try and seek freedom and what's happened, both good and bad, when they've done so, and the pitfalls of freedom, which is something that I think authors like Sarah Collins and Yvonne Battle-Felton have written so brilliantly about. And this, for me, goes into that sort of incredible group of novels where freedom is almost flipped on its head. Yes, there is the great stuff about it, but also there isn't, and also just women's rights, and yeah. And this travels across, well, the world in a lot of ways, and I love that. There are shed loads of coincidences. Now, I don't normally like books with coincidences, but I absolutely devoured this, and I was totally on board. I think there was only one where I was like, really? But I forgave it and carried on. But if you aren't a fan of coincidences in literature, then this might not be for you. But I just thought it was great. And I think this really appealed to me in some ways because one of the subjects matter around it, which is actually another subject matter coming up in the next book, and it was interesting because I read the next two books back to back and they really chime with each other on this front, is about estrangement from families in particular. And I'm going to say currently, because you never know what's going to happen, but I can't quite see it happening for some time, but I'm currently estranged from some members of my family. And it's a really complex thing. It's a really difficult thing, but it's a really, it's almost like a taboo, I think, to sort of distance yourself from family. But it does this book particularly looks at what does constitute a family and the ties that bind within a family, but also how you can't let your family get away with everything. And sometimes if your family do bad things, you have to make difficult decisions. And I thought that was really powerfully done. So it chimed to me on a personal level as well as just being this incredible debut about this incredible woman and incredible women around her, and the power of friendship, the power of food. Yeah, I just thought this was really, 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 really good. So talking about it then, definitely 4 out of 5, that one. As is Malibu Rising by Taylor Jenkins Reid. And this book just once again, once again, not reminds me, although it did remind me, but solidifies the fact that Taylor Jenkins Reid writes some kind of wordy crack that I just can't stop reading once I've started. I read Daisy Jones at the beginning of the year, loved that. Prior to that, I read Carrie Soto, who appears in this. Carrie Soto is back for an event that I did with Taylor in November, I think it was, October, November. And this one, just the same thing. And what's so interesting is I don't really care about books about sports, so Carrie Soto shouldn't work for me because it was about tennis. I don't really care about don't really care for books about music. Love Daisy Jones. Couldn't really give a monkeys about surfing. Love this one. And there is also an element of music in it because, I should say, this is about Nina Reaver, but also her siblings. And it's set over one night in Nina Reaver's house which is where she throws these parties that everyone knows about, but of course it's not set over one night because you go back and you learn how her parents met, including her father, who is a fallen rock star, is what I'm going to say, or a rock fallen star. He's quite a character, Mick Reaver, and it just had me. And I just kind of loved the gossipy nature of it. I loved all these different characters from like Hollywood, who, be they actors, be they musicians, whatever, who were just behaving so badly at the party, but also the family secrets that we found out about. Oh, it does have a little bit of the rock and roll story is a bit similar to Daisy Jones, which is why I think I gave this 4 rather than 5, because I'd read Daisy Jones quite recently. But the characters are just brilliant, and I like the fact that all of her characters are really multifaceted, and sometimes they do quite dislikable things and can be quite dislikable, yet you still like them and you still want to read them. And I really liked the way that this looked at family, and again, sometimes how we estrange ourselves or distance ourselves from family, but also the importance of siblings. I think that's something that really, really sings through this book, and I love my siblings. So yeah, that was a corking book. I devoured it on the flight back from Mexico. I think I had a little bit of a sleep in between, but literally other than that, it was like literally devour on some food. I'll always stop anything for food. So, yeah. But yeah, just corking, and I'm now like, oh, I don't know if I want to get to the 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo yet, because then I'll have finished kind of like the books within this world that she's created, where characters do interlink and histories and stuff interlink of the characters or people. And yeah, that said, I have bought her previous 4 books to that, so we'll be devouring them at some point. And maybe what I'll do is an author spotlight where I talk about the 4 in this kind of world, and then read the 4 that I haven't. Ooh, that could be quite a good idea. What do you think? Let me know in the comments down below. Then we have a favourite author of mine who has cemented the fact that they are definitely a favourite author of mine. This is Joanna Cannon's A Tidy Ending, which, full disclosure, I read a third of last year because I was going to be doing an event with Joanna, and then sadly it got cancelled for various reasons, but I loved it. Shouted about it on Sky's Book Club because I knew I was going to love it, and then was doing an event with Joanna in March, hence why I'd put it on hold to read when we were going to be doing a paperback event in full. And I started again, absolutely just hooked by this book. And if you've read Joanna's books before, you'll know the way that she makes the ordinary extraordinary and celebrates it is wonderful. The wry sense of humour, the way she really captures human foibles and people's characteristics and their characteristic tics is just fantastic. And she does that in this book, which is all about a wonderful character. Well, I was going to say a wonderful character, but she's a very, what's the term I want to use? She's one of those characters who kind of, you feel like could pull the rug from under you at any point, and you're not really sure why. She's called Linda, and Linda has moved into this house with her husband quite recently, but is getting posts coming from a woman called Rebecca, and for a woman, sorry, called Rebecca, not from, who had these magazines of a lifestyle that Linda believes should be the lifestyle that she has. Instead, she's ended up in a marriage that's just kind of functioning with a, I think, wonderful, but she feels overbearing mother, but I kind of like the character, so that's why. And she's sort of ended up in the, I guess, the burbs really, where, though, there are some murders happening and a serial killer is on the loose. That's all going on in the background as I mentioned, Linda kind of becomes obsessed with this Rebecca and this life she has, and decides she wants to find Rebecca, and she wants Rebecca to be her friend. And that is all I'll say. But I will say there's lots of mystery. So who's Rebecca, and how will that go? But also what's going on with this serial killer. And yeah, what I also loved about this book is that I think it's got one of the darkest twists in its tale of Jo's books so far, and that I just really enjoyed, because I like a book that's got not a nasty ending exactly, but not far off. So yeah, I would recommend this very much. This is another reason that I need to do wrap-ups closer to time, because I feel like with some of these I've had a little bit too much distance, and so like I'm either forgetting characters' names or thinking, oh, should I have mentioned this or that or the other? But that one, along with these two, are also in a reading vlog that I did, along with, I almost dare not mention this after a comment I got the other day, but along with Friendaholic by Elizabeth Day. I'm whispering because apparently I've mentioned the fact that I'm friends with her too often recently, and I'm name dropping a lot in videos, even though I'm just talking about who I know, and not wanting you to think that any narcissism is going on, or is it nepotism, or any of that's going on. I'll stop whispering now. So Joanna Cannon's absolutely corking book. Then we have the book that I read on my birthday in the morning, and this to me was the perfect start to a new year for me, as it were. What is it? Sorry, I got distracted then because I was thinking, and it's the book that I started documenting every read that I'm reading in my 42nd year, even though I'm only 41. I feel like I have to say that every time. I don't know why I'm not bothered, because I prefer the number 42 to 41. Anyway, I was going to say I have, but I haven't. I put a post about this and then haven't done a post on any of the other books that I've read since, partly because a lot of them are Women's Prize. And again, excuse me, I don't want, I had a 7-Up before I filmed this, I don't want Mum getting a whiff of what my feelings are about the Women's Prize long list. Although she has had a little one because, as I mentioned, we did pod for Patreon Book Club, and sometimes I have special guests at Patreon Book Club, and for this one it was my mother. Anyway, so the book that I read on my 21st birthday, I bloody wish. No, actually, no, I don't. I wouldn't want to be back in my 20s or even really my 30s. Absolutely loving my 40s. Feel like I've really come into my own, which sounds so grandiose, but it's true. Anyway, the first book that I read in my 42nd year on my 41st birthday was Pessimism is for Lightweights, 30 Pieces of Courage and Resistance by Salena Godden. Now, I had read this pamphlet version, which is 13 Pieces of Resistance, a few years ago when I saw Salena perform from it. But this adds another 17 into the mix. And this is just so good. It's a collection of mainly poems, but also lovely pieces like this. Hope is Energy, and where's another one that I can give you? Love knows we have so much to do. It's just such a positive, powerful, punching poetry collection that I want everyone to read this, because if you think you don't like poems, you will like the poems in here. I'm trying to see if I can find my favourite one, which made me laugh so much. I don't think I'm going to be able to, but it's about it's about someone who's questioning whether they need to get their private parts shaved in order to have them checked, and the answer is of course no, you don't. But it's just done in this really funny way, yet it's so powerful and so celebrates both the glory of medicine and the NHS, but also just empowering yourself. Like, I don't have the parts involved, but I felt empowered by it, but also that like I need to check myself and my health much more than I probably do. But there's also poems in here about politics. There's poems in here about, well, all of them are feminist, which I think is brilliant. And yeah, I just loved it. It's also very much a state of the world right now collection, but in a positive way. Like, there's troubling stuff in here, but it's hopeful because pessimism is for lightweights. Absolutely brilliant. I feel like I've got rusty at this. Then the first of 2 short story collections that I absolutely loved. Oh, I meant to say 5 out of 5 of this, which I very rarely give poetry collections, but I just thought this was phenomenal. And a 5 out of 5 of this, which is Jollof Rice and Other Revolutions by Omolola, Ijeoma, Ogunyemi. And this is a short story collection that I read for my March Savage Reads prompt, which are 13 prompts that me and my mum and lots of lovely you are reading to throughout the year, which were picked by lots of you lovely lot. Well, were suggested by lots of you lovely lot, and then me and mum picked them. And March's was a book with your favourite colour on the cover. Purple is my favourite colour, and so this was what I went for. And it's one that I've been wanting to read because I love books set in Nigeria. I love Nigerian fiction, and this is just that. Although it starts off in Nigeria and the same characters kind of pop up in different stories at different points, but it kind of goes around from Nigeria and then around the world and sort of back again. And it goes into the past, it goes even into the future at different points. They're all very realistic stories. They're not fabulous. They're not fantastical. They're all set in reality. And I thought they were just so powerful, and they opened my eyes to some things that I just had no idea about, and realised that I'd made certain assumptions about Nigerian culture that had been proved wrong, some which have sadly been proved right, but also then takes us out to America and we see people who go out there in the hope of everything becoming good and it being good for some but awful for others, and those who go out and it's awful coming back, or thinking that it's great, coming back and being like, oh God, I love my home country and my culture, and why am I not celebrating that more? Just brilliantly done, and I can't wait for whatever Omolola writes next, because yeah, I just thought this was fantastic. This I thought was, I dare say, even more fantastic, and it's The Secret Lives of Church Ladies by Deesha Philyaw, and this is possibly, I think, one of my favourite short story collections ever. I loved how sassy, saucy and sensitive this was. I love how it looked at women's lives and would not flip the expectation of what you thought you were going to get out of the story, but it reminded me in a lot of ways of one of my favourite collections of short stories of all time, which is The Redemption of Gale and Pipe by Karis Davies, because you never get what you expect in a good way from her stories. There's always not a twist, and she doesn't like the term twist, so I'm definitely not using it, but a surprise and something unexpected. And this very much felt the case for me with The Secret Lives of Church Ladies. And I guess it was that salacious, saucy start that got me right into the rhythm of it, but it just kept me going and had me hooked, and every single story was an absolute banger. So yeah, I just think this is utterly incredible, and it's the kind of short story that, and I don't say this very often, I would really like to read again at some point. I almost feel like I want to read it again like this year, and I never say that. And I have a similar feeling to this one. I think because this one's interlinked stories, I think I'd like to look for the links more than I maybe did the first time around, because I was just so lost in the stories. So yeah, I thought this was just brilliant, and I loved the positivity and the joy and the hope in it, as well as there being some very difficult stories or themes within the work. Yeah, I just thought this was fantastic. And last but certainly not least, this is a long old video, but there hasn't been one for a while, so hey ho. My favourite book of the month, well, one of them actually, because there's 4 or 5 that could be favourites. So actually, that Patreon video where I do my top 10 of the year is going to be really difficult this month. Oh Lord, I don't want to think about it. Yeah, I'm going to say at the top spot for March was Clytemnestra by Costanza Casati, and I had the pleasure of hosting Costanza in Liverpool. Well, I don't like the term hosting. I had the pleasure of being in conversation with her in Liverpool at Waterstones for an event, and this, I felt like I was a bit over Greek myth retellings, or not over it, but I felt like I'd read a lot. It was becoming quite saturated, and whilst they've all been different and original, and I'm instantly thinking of Natalie Haynes' Stoneblind, which I thought was just brilliant because I loved its snarkiness, I loved its feminist bent, I guess I want to say, and I just thought it was giving a voice to someone who's been voiceless and demonised, and their story. I just thought it was brilliant. This, for me, felt really fresh. Excuse me, that's 7 Up again. This, for me, felt really fresh because the gods are kind of at the background, and this is very much about a woman's story, the life of this woman who goes through so much and who carries on and who does break down at points but builds herself back up, or strategizes her way back up, or villainously gets her way with her beguiling nature, I guess. But Clytemnestra, I think Costanza has just created this fully formed Clytemnestra who's so complex and so different. And yet this is a real story of what it's like to be human and all the human emotions that we go through, and yet is done in this mythical, with these sort of shadows of the myths in the background, and also a character who's actually I was going to say bystander, but she was definitely not standing by, but was part of so many different parts of the myths and legends that, yeah, I just thought this was absolutely brilliantly done. This is a stunning edition. It's the Waterstones edition, and yeah, I thought this was absolutely phenomenal. I'm desperate for my mum to read it because I really like to hear her thoughts on it, and I would also love me and mum, if she loves it, which I think she will, to do something on here with Costanza if we can. I was going to start doing a classically savage series of videos. That said, this has reminded me why I should keep reading classical myth retellings, but at the same time, this is very different and stands out, and I don't want to get too back into them because I was feeling like some of them, with the exception of the two that I've mentioned, were beginning to feel a little bit samey. Although there are authors like Jennifer Saint that I haven't read yet that I really, really want to get to. Anyway, I thought this was absolutely brilliant. I thought the writing was phenomenal. It's a proper yarn. You're completely gripped and immersed throughout. And I hate saying this cliched statement, but I'm going to say it. I could not believe this was a debut. It was so assured and so vivid and evocative and just such a brilliant, complex character study that, yeah, I was kind of floored by it. So, yeah, really, really thrilled I read that. So there we go. That was what I read in March. I'm going to go now because this has been a very long video and I'm not going to edit much off it or zoom in and out because I'm going to be off to London tomorrow when this goes live, and so I just don't have the time, which sounds really nonchalant. I don't mean it to, but I very much just want to be filming and editing when I'm in the mood, and things are a little bit bonkers, gearing up to be very bonkers again over the coming weeks. So yeah, if I'm a bit sporadic, please do bear with, and I'll be telling you more about that soon because I want to work out how I can take you along with me and give you insights into a fun new thing that I'm going to be doing very soon. So yeah, I hope you're doing super duper well. Thank you as always for watching. It's been lovely spending time with you. Have a chat with me in the comments down below about any of these books or anything else that you want to have a little bit of a chat about. Don't forget that my Instagram, Twitter, Patreon, wishlist, and all those things are linked below. And if you want to subscribe, that'd be lovely. And if you want to give this a thumbs up, that'd be ace. But until next time, I will see you in another video very, very soon. Well, soonish. Bye.